What's up, everyone? I'm in Tampa, walking north on Nebraska Avenue, crossing over the Hillsborough River. As you look up ahead, you see a pretty nondescript road, pretty bland, pretty boring, but it wasn't always that way. 100 years ago, the area that we see on the side of the river that we're about to be crossing to was the #1 tourist destination in all of Florida. Today, we're going to take a walk through Sulphur Springs, the area once known as Tampa's Coney Island. We're going to walk from this spot here, take a look through the springs themselves, and then walk under the highway and conclude our walk near Tampa's Sulphur Springs water tower. Today, Sulphur Springs is a part of the city of Tampa, incorporated in 1953. It's a low-income, high-crime area, a far cry from the resort destination it was from roughly 1900 through the early 1970s. And today there's very little signs of the tourist destination of its golden era in the past. To my right, we're going to see one of the last remaining signs, which is the Sulphur Springs Theater, one of the few structures that has not been demolished from its heyday. Now this theater is being renovated and converted into a distillery that will also be used for weddings and other events. Currently it is still closed. I'm now crossing Nebraska Avenue, and back 50 plus years ago, this stretch here was lined with hotels, ice cream shops, and other amenities for the many visitors to the Sulphur Springs, until many of it was demolished and made way for incremental parking for the nearby Tampa Greyhound lot, kind of destroying this as a tourist destination. So next we're gonna take a walk into the springs themselves, which are just on the banks of the Hillsborough River. There's a fence around the springs. Let's see what we can see. You can see the springs from over here, but I'd like to get a little bit closer. How do I get in? This fence goes all the way up to the banks of the river. Let's see. I'm wearing my Spider-Man shirt because to start today's walking tour, I'm gonna have to do a little bit of minor acrobatics to get through this hole in the fence. No open door for here, but it's nothing the urban walker won't do to get you better views of the historic sites that we show. All right, we're on the inside. Let's take a closer look at these springs. Legend has it that Native Americans drank from the springs here for centuries and benefited from the medicinal qualities of the natural mineral water. Later European explorers in the 15 and 1600s did the same thing. Then in the late 1800s, a doctor from Tampa named John Mills was interested in the medicinal qualities that he could offer his patients from the minerals in these springs. So he purchased the property here and around the springs. Then he recognized the money-making commercial potential of the springs, since it had already grown a reputation in the area, and he opened a small resort around it. But Business was kind of limited. At the time, the really only realistic way to arrive here was via horseback. It's 5 miles away from the city of Tampa, which is effectively currently downtown, in an era where not that many people had cars. So he sold the property in 1904 to a man named Josiah Richardson. Now Richardson lucked out because just 3 years later, in 1907, there was a new trolley line that was built, extending with stops in the city of Tampa, downtown, going right here with a stop, just walking distance from these springs at the resort that he had purchased. A new bridge was built connecting the trolley line to this destination. And in the 1910s, Josiah really started developing his new resort and property. He started building several swimming pools, including one that is just beyond these trees. That's still the only one that's still open today. Built a dance hall, hotels, an amusement park, and a zoo that had an alligator farm. They even had an amusement park with a roller coaster. So it became really happening. In the 20s, he further developed this property. Put a gazebo, which we see right in front of us. A toboggan slide that would allow kids to take the slide and plunge in the spring waters right below this very bridge. Became a real popular gateway destination, affordable and popular with middle class and working class people from Florida, as well as somewhat wealthier people from the Northeast who had cars. So this place was really starting to take off. It was during this time that it became known as Tampa's Coney Island. Josiah had ambition. He wanted even more. He wanted to be bigger than Coney Island. So in 1927, pretty close to the spot where we saw the parking lot earlier, he built the Sulphur Springs Arcade. Sulphur Springs Arcade was only 2 floors, but it occupied a full city block. Oh, I see why this is closed. Got some hazards here. All right, looks like I have to climb and get out here. See if too old for this climbing. Let me see if I have any way where I don't have to climb out. Problem was that all that development, that arcade, and other businesses built by other owners in the area taking advantage of the popularity of the springs, it created a need for water that wasn't supplied by the current plumbing setup, for lack of a better word. So Josiah Richardson, the main proprietor in this area, and the one who was really taking a gamble on this growing even bigger than it was, he invested in a water tower that would service the water needs of his arcade and other surrounding businesses. Took a lot of money. He had to take on debt of $180,000, which is equivalent to $2.5 million in today's currency. But the investment seemed worth it. His attractions businesses have been booming for the prior decade and a half, and Richardson had ambition for more. We're about to see that once we cross the highway, but the tower was built in 1927, was completed in less than a year. And when you get to see it, it's not just any water tower. It looks like both a lighthouse and a medieval castle. It has slit windows and battlements crowning the holding tank. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to get inside today, but it's an impressive sight. That new tower was able to effectively meet the water needs of the new arcade and multiple other businesses that had sprung up. But something not so great was about to happen. It's the late 20s, so in 1929, the Depression hit. And that really hurt the demand for the area. Remember, it was dependent not so much on your wealthy tourists, but more your working class and middle class tourists, particularly the locals. And they just didn't have the money with the high unemployment. And then in 1933, something even more direct happened. There was a tropical storm that hit the area, and it resulted in huge floods in this Sulphur Springs area, particularly the businesses that dotted Nebraska Avenue, including Richardson's own arcade, Sulphur Springs Arcade. So this was a disaster. He was dependent on income from the rents from the different businesses that were occupying his arcade, and they couldn't do business. Their properties had been damaged, so he had to file bankruptcy and unfortunately was forced to sell his property. Emerging in front of us is the Sulphur Springs water tower. Let's get a little closer look. It is 65 meters or 214 feet high. This pretty significant investment that Richardson made, it was a risk, and a risk that did not pay. But he wasn't the only one in the area affected. And in the 1930s, hit by the double blow of the Depression and now the flood destroying so many properties in the area, many business owners would come right here to this tower, which was open at the time, and scale the steps, go to the top, and leap to their deaths. It was believed that hundreds of people in the 1930s committed suicide from this very spot. But it did continue to serve the water needs of the area for many years. There was a bacteria problem in the 1960s, and then in 1971, Tampa Water Authority basically made this unfunctional and took over the needs of the area. And it became an abandoned relic for many years. There was a movie theater about roughly where I'm standing, drive-in movie theater, that was right next door to it, and that carried some interest of having the water tower nearby. But once that closed, that movie theater closed in 1986, there was discussions of tearing this down, building some housing here. But then in 1991, it was declared a historic site. For the most of that time, though, it's been abandoned and closed off to the public. All right, we're right next to the water tower. They are painting it and renovating it, but there looks like there is an opening here, so we can get right up to the base. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we'll be able to get inside. Everything, the windows, which are pretty high, are gated up. Well, this area with its springs, its water tower, and its many different amenities basically reached this peak in the 1920s, in an era when those things like alligator farms could actually draw tourists and interest change. But in the 40s and 50s, under new ownership after Richardson had sold it, it continued to be a spot, at least for locals. Then in the 1960s, there was a bacteria outbreak, and in the 1970s, this place was pretty much dead. It had already been kind of dying for a few years. So in 1975, the central spot, the arcade, the Sulphur Springs arcade that Richardson had constructed in 1927, was sold to the nearby Tampa Greyhound track for auxiliary parking, and that pretty much signaled the end of the era for this as a tourist destination. As described earlier, the neighborhood is economically depressed and not at all a tourist destination today, as you could basically see during the course of our walk. But it is kind of what many say is perhaps the next spot to be gentrified in Tampa. So who knows? Maybe it will one day again become a tourist destination highlighting the springs. Anyway, this was the Urban Walker taking you through Sulphur Springs Park and Water Tower. Please subscribe to my channel, and until the next walk, I'll see you.